Good morning. It's good to see each one of you here this morning. We appreciate your presence, especially those of you who may be visiting with us. We are thankful and grateful for you to be with us here this morning. In preparation for our summer Bible school, this morning's lesson and this evening's lesson, we're going to look at Joseph. Our topic or theme that we're going to study about for the week is Joseph and his life. I want to notice some things about Joseph this morning and his character and how God builds character in us and did in Joseph. In Genesis chapter 37, in our text that we read, we'll spend our time in Genesis, looking at the life of Joseph here. And when we think of the patriarchs, men such as Abraham, a man of faith, as Isaac, the son of promise, or Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. But do you ever consider Joseph as being a patriarch? In the book of Genesis, there is more space that is devoted to Jacob than any others. Beginning about chapter 37 and going through the end of Genesis, chapter 50. And if you have read those, and hopefully you have at some point in your life, but if you haven't, go back and read. If you have, go back and read it again. If you haven't, read it. You'll notice there about Joseph, there is not a single word of reproof of him. So the character then of Joseph is worthy to be studied. It is worthy of our careful consideration and study of this man. His noble character, his purity of heart, and his magnanimity as a ruler and as a brother. Make him more than maybe more than others, but more than certainly some of the Old Testament characters as an illustration of what type of man Christ was to give to the world in perfection. The ISB illustrates Joseph as this. So let's review in our study this morning, in our lesson this morning, the life of Joseph. And understand what a wonderful character that was displayed by this man of God. First of all, let's go back in his life. As a son of Canaan. As a son of Canaan, one of the sons of Jacob, he was hated by his brothers. In verse 2, in our text that we read in Genesis 37, telling on his brothers didn't help his case with them. It says in verse 2 that these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, not by himself, but with his brethren. And he was a lad with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought the evil report of them unto their father. Joseph, here it says, being 17 years old, would make Jacob around about 108 years old. He was feeding the flock with his brethren. Or that word feeding there translated shepherding the flock. this evil report that he brought, by not only by observations by himself or what he saw himself of his brethren, but likely also what was reported by others concerning them as well. He brought this report back to his father. In verses 3 and 4, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, and they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. The favoritism showed by his father towards him inflamed their hatred of their brother. But Joseph didn't feel this way towards his brothers. His father didn't help in this way either. He was the son of his old age. Joseph, in his life, verse 5, we'll look at here in just a moment as the story continues, still not helping his cause towards his brothers, because he has these dreams. In verse 5 beginning, he says, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet more. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves came round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said unto him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet more for his dream and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, behold, I have dreamed yet a dream, and behold, the sun and the moon, and even the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So now even his father, do you think that myself, your father and your mother and your brothers are going to bow down to you? How? How is this going to come about, Joseph? This isn't the normal thing of life to do. How is this going to come about? But these dreams unfold in the story later of Joseph. His brothers eventually sold him into slavery. Verse 12 to the end of the chapter, chapter 37. They sold him, their own brother. As you read the story, some of them wanted to do much worse. They wanted to kill him. Their hatred of him was so bad that they didn't want him around. They wanted him dead. His brother, one of his brothers, convinced the others then not to do this. So he was spared by Reuben. Verse 21 and 22, it says, and Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hand and said, let us not take his life. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but lay no hand upon him, that he might deliver him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So Reuben's plan here. Let's just throw him in this pit that was deep, it was dry ground. Let's throw him in there. Don't kill him. And in Reuben's mind, he says, I'm going to come back later and get him out. But then one of his other brothers speaks up as well. Verse 26 and 27. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. And let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh. And his brethren hearkened unto him. So they're recognizing here Joseph as their brother. But that did not take away the hatred that they had for him. As Judah now convinces his other brothers, if we kill him, we're going to have to make up some story and we're going to have to conceal his blood somehow. How are we going to do that? Let's instead sell him to these nomads, to these Ishmaelites who will take him away from here, and we won't have to deal with him anymore. After all, he is our brother. Joseph was faithful to his father. Some children rebel against their parents in order to gain favor with the other siblings. Joseph remained faithful to his father, willing to obey his wishes. Verse 13. And Israel said unto Joseph, are not thy brethren feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. He was willing to do what his father asked him to do. Now one might think of the ill treatment that Joseph endured by his brothers, followed by the separation from his country, and his family would produce bitterness and hopelessness in a young man. 17 years old, remember. But yet the character of Joseph shines through when we see him as a slave in Egypt. He was an overseer of Potiphar's house, blessed by God. Chapter 39, and he found favor in Potiphar's eyes. Chapter 39 and verse 1 says, and Joseph brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him out of the hand of the Ishmaelites, that he had brought him down hither. And Jehovah was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that Jehovah was with him, and that Jehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found favor in his sight, and he ministered unto him, and he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he made him an overseer in his house and all that he had, that Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Jehovah was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, And he knew not aught that he was with him, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was comely and well favored. Joseph had proved himself trustworthy. He had proved himself to be industrious. 17 years old, this young man so left his father, his country, all his kin, left all that he knew, not by his choice, had left all that he knew and had gone to this Egyptian's house to serve him as a slave. But one thing that Joseph never forgot was God. He made the best, Joseph made the best of a situation, and God blessed him and Potiphar. Down through verse 20 of chapter 6 here. At the end of verse 6 there it says Joseph was comely and he was a handsome man. Down through verse 20. Joseph was tempted by Potiphar's wife. His master as well, in a sense. She, time and time again, tried to seduce him. And he resisted out of his faithfulness to Potiphar and to God. Verses 8 and 9 says, But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master knoweth not what is with me in the house, and he hath put all that he hath into my hand. He is not greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee. Because thou art his wife, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Our lessons this week around Joseph are tailored, if you will, a little bit towards the young because of this young man and the temptations that were before him. But it's on to all of us, lessons in all of us, of course. But this young man, facing the temptation to commit fornication, he resisted. Because why? He did not want to sin against his master and God. He disregarded her advances time and again, and she spitefully accused him of wrongdoing. One of the times that she had tried to entice him as he was leaving, as he was running away, a garment was left. And she used that to accuse him. Upon lies. I'll try and speak louder. Joseph was imprisoned. Oh, we talked a little bit about prison. There it goes. I can hear myself. We talked a little bit about prison in our class this morning of Paul. Joseph didn't enjoy 3 meals a day, a comfy bed, and recreation time and whatnot. he was put in prison and left there. It wasn't comfortable. But because of someone's lies, this young man who had risen to oversee this man's house, because of God, and everything that he had done now, up to this point here, where of his wife wrongfully accusing Joseph, didn't matter. Didn't matter to Potiphar. Now Joseph here, again in prison, made the best of a situation that he was in. Not only did he rise to be an overseer in the house of Potiphar, he became, because of God, and God had blessed him, he became an overseer in Pharaoh's prison. Blessed by God, he found the favor of the prison guard, verse 21. But Jehovah was with Joseph, and showed kindness unto him, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because Jehovah was with him, and that which he did, Jehovah made it to prosper. Placed in charge of all the other prisoners with complete trust. Prospered in his new role by God, who was with him. Chapter 40 of Genesis here through chapter 41 and verse 36. Joseph, there's two things that happen here. Joseph becomes the interpreter of dreams. And the second thing that happens there, he is forgotten and then remembered. He interprets the dreams of the butler and the baker. But it wasn't Joseph. He did not take the credit for all of this, any of this. Verse 8 of chapter 40, he acknowledged God as the interpreter. He says, and they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, I pray you. Verse 20. He says, and it came to pass the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the head of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. Joseph, as God is telling him the interpretation of these dreams, tells these two men that are in prison with him, one of you is going to live, one of you is going to die. And here we are, just a little while later, at Pharaoh's birthday. The butler restored to his former position. The baker is hanged. Joseph asked these men not to forget him. Well, we know the one can't remember anything, but the butler forgot him. And as time passes on here, Pharaoh has dreams. Joseph then interprets those dreams. Chapter 41, verse 16. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh the answer of peace." And in verse 25 then, and Joseph said unto Pharaoh, "The dream of Pharaoh is one. What God is about to do, he hath declared unto Pharaoh." And then in verse 32, it says, "And for that the dream was doubted and doubled unto Pharaoh. It is because the thing it is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass." Now, these dreams, of course, they're talking about that Joseph that Pharaoh is dreaming, and Joseph interprets this. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. But Joseph never forgets God in all of this. He gives God the credit, gives God the glory, gives God the honor for the one that is going to interpret these dreams and tell Pharaoh about these. Verse 33, he says, "Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint overseers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that come, and lay up grain under the hand of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. And the food shall be for a store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perisheth not through the famine." Joseph is offering advice here to Pharaoh. You look out among the people, and you pick one to be an overseer. You let one to oversee all of this for the gathering of the food. And then, of course, as the story goes on, for the distribution of this. Falsely accused, thrown in prison, made an overseer in the prison, forgotten by man. And the question might come to one's mind is why bother to be righteous? But Joseph maintained his integrity, which we'll talk about this evening. Joseph maintained his integrity and was not forgotten by God. Just as he had found favor in Potiphar's eyes, in the eyes of the prison guard, so he enjoyed favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. From an overseer in a house to an overseer in the prison, Joseph becomes a prince in Egypt. He was wise in his service to Pharaoh. Verse 38 of chapter 41. And Pharaoh said unto servants, "Can we find such one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all of this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name, it's a long one, Zaphnath-Paneah. And he gave him to wife Asenath, and the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. 13 years to this point here, where he was sold by his brothers to where he is second over the land of Egypt. How could you not see the hand of God in Joseph's life? His wisdom was manifested in his administration, showing foresight in the years of plenty, verses 47 and 49. Showing shrewdness during the years of famine. Verse 51, he says, And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God hath made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenty that was in the land of Egypt came to an end. Verse 54 begins the 7 years of famine began to come. Not only was there a famine in Egypt, there was a famine in all the lands. But it says of Egypt was the only place there was bread. Joseph, verse 56, says that Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And all the countries, verse 57, came into Egypt to buy grain. Chapter 47 and verses 13 to 26 bring out the shrewdness as well here during this years of famine. But yet, as shrewd as he was merciful in his treatment of his brethren. Chapter 42 through chapter 45 and verse 15. You see that he is reunited with his family, with his brothers, and his father. "13 years, roughly, had passed. And when the brothers had come to buy grain in Egypt, they could not recognize him. But yet he knew exactly who they were. He did not reveal himself until later in the story. They had no idea that this was their brother. Chapter 46 then begins. As his family comes to Egypt, he arranged for them to live in the land of Goshen. A prosperous land, a fertile land. One of the most fertile places in the land of Egypt. Joseph, and when he revealed himself to his brothers, he reassured his brothers that he had forgiven them for what they had done. Chapter 45 and verse 4. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. And now be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and there are yet 5 years of which there shall be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant in the earth, and to save you alive by a great deliverance. And so it was now not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Did you notice what Joseph said to his brothers there? In verse 5, it wasn't you. It wasn't you who sold me, but it was God. It was God who sent me into this land. Now, what is the tendency of most people today when tragedy strikes in lives, or things aren't going the way that they expect or want to in their lives? What's the first thing most often that comes to mind? And they say, why did God let this happen to me? Why does God want me to go through this? Why is God making me go through all of this? Why is God persecuting me? Look what Joseph said, that God did this to me. He didn't blame God in any way. Why did God let me come to this forsaken land and go through all of these things, be in prison? And my brothers, why did they let my brothers sell me? God did send me before you to preserve life. How could, in our minds, how could Joseph forgive his brothers for what they had done? He didn't blame them. He didn't hold it over their head. He forgave them. Joseph understood. As the younger brother, he understood this is what God wanted. And he stayed faithful to God. He reassured them again in chapter 50. In verses 15 to 21, when Jacob had died, that he had forgiven them. Believing in the providence of God. Verse 20 of chapter 50. And as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring to pass, and it is this day, to save much people alive. Believing in that providence of God, and that God could make good things come out of evil intentions or evil towards him. His reassurance that God's hand was in all of this and that God would be with him. And God showed him that he was with him. Verse 24. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from hence. He knew that God would keep his promise that was made to his people. Joseph was not living by what he could see, but by his faith in God, his trust in God. The circumstances that he was in, many people have left God and left following God for lesser things. But Joseph stayed true. That's the kind of character that we need. God is not to blame for our circumstances or tragedies in life. But he is certainly there to help us through them. In the life and the story of Joseph, we see the value of a character centered in faith and trust in God, devoted to serving God with honor and with dependability, unwilling to be deterred by hatred, by betrayal, by the forgetfulness of others. Willing to forgive the wrongdoings committed by others. He was able to see the bigger picture and the wonderful workings by God in the affairs of men. This noble character can be used and can be useful in all seasons of life. As a youth, tempted and tried with no help from friend or family. As a mature individual, charged with important responsibilities, or as an aged person, knowing that death is imminent. So may the character of Joseph serve to inspire us to developing our character, as we that in some small way, we too can be an example to them that believe in word, in manner of life, in love, in faith, in purity. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12. Certainly, this was the character of this patriarch, Joseph. And may we look to him and the lessons that we can learn from him, invaluable to our own lives. A kind of character that we should have, that we should strive to develop in our lives as we serve and worship God. If you're here this morning and not yet a child of God, I would urge you to plead with you to think about your life, where you would spend eternity if our Lord should return this moment. And hopefully and prayerfully that thought and that consideration will lead you to obedience, to be baptized for the remission of your sins, or as an erring child of God, that you would repent of your sins and ask God, pray to God for his forgiveness. That is our hope and that is our plea. We can help you and encourage you to do so this morning. Why not come now and while we stand and sing?
Softly.